All right. How you guys doing? Hope you're doing well today. For the first part of this assignment, like I've done for the last couple of weeks, I want you to put something that happened on this day in history, April 28th, and a famous person born on this day in history, April 28th. All right. So we're going to continue looking at, kind of the rise of the Nazis to power. Although today we're going to be talking about some years of struggle where things don't go too well. Of course, they didn't go too well before this, as we looked at their failed takeover of the government. But we'll be looking at the time period basically from 1923 to 1929. Well, when we left the story, Hitler had a failed takeover. He was arrested. Uh, he was put in prison. His section where he stayed was reserved for political prisoners as he's awaiting trial, and even after he is found guilty, he stays in the same type prison cell. They're actually more spacious than most other cells, a more comfortable mattress. There was a desk. Typically, there was a window. It was barred, but there was a window where you could look outside and see the trees and the beautiful landscapes. Like I said, writing desk and chair. This is where Hitler would begin doing some writing. Uh, Finally, tried for treason, Hitler put his oratorical skills to good use. If you don't know what oratorical means, that means public speaking skills. Uh, he commandeered the courtroom in Munich as a political platform on his final day before judgment. The court found Hitler guilty as charged. Now, I'm going to stop here real quick. Can you imagine what would happen if in the United States during this time period or today, either way, you're found guilty of treason and you tried to overthrow the government? What kind of prison sentence do you think you would get? I mean, I know you guys can already see it on the screen, but I'm pretty sure you'd get a longer sentence than 5 years in jail and only be in jail for 9 months. I mean, treason is considered punishable by death. It's considered the worst crime you can commit against your country. However, Hitler was found guilty, yet he was given a lenient sentence. Hitler could have been deported to Austria. The judge refused to take that step, saying Hitler is a German Austrian. It said this, the judge did, quote, in the opinion of the court, a man who thinks and feels as German as Hitler, a man who voluntarily served 4.5 years in the German army during the war, and who earned high war decorations for bravery in the face of the enemy, who was wounded and whose health was impaired, should not be subjected to the Republic Protection Law and thus deported. So the judge valued Hitler's patriotism, his devotion to Germany, that he was a war veteran, that he was a brave war veteran at that. So even though the court acknowledged Hitler's crime, they sentenced him to 5 years in prison, in which he only served 9 months. And when we say prison, this was a pretty nice prison cell compared to what you would think of as your typical prison cell. Now, Hitler would receive food packages from people outside, people who were part of the Nazi Party or fans of him, and he would get a lot of them. He read a lot of books while he was in here. He received the Munich newspapers, and through reports, he heard about what was going on in the Nazi Party from other Nazi leaders, and it wasn't really good. In Hitler's absence, the Nazis had disintegrated into some warring factions. They weren't unified, each claiming to uphold the values of what they called the Hitler movement. Um, the Nazis saw themselves as out and out left wing socialists, while other people saw them maybe as right wing and anti Semitist. Obviously, they were anti Semitic, but I also think they were also some pretty far out left wing socialists to some degree as well. It is here that Hitler begins to write what would be his most famous work. Granted, I think he only wrote one other book anyway, but he wrote Mein Kampf, which is a political autobiography. So it is partly the story of his life, but it's also very political. It talks about his goals and his agenda. Definitely uses a lot of propaganda. The phrase Mein Kampf literally means my struggle. It's really a mix of Nazi history, political theory, and street smarts. However, it rambles. It shows that Hitler doesn't have a real good grasp of the German language. He's not illiterate, but he's also not a great writer. He rambles and drones on, makes for hard reading. Many pages of Mein Kampf devoted to tirades against Jewish people, obviously, is a big part of what he wrote about. He said the Jews were the source of all degeneracy, and that they have a special link to Marxism. So he also, kind of bashed communism as well. He talked about the purification of the German race, and that the Jews needed to be banished because he called them parasites who seduced that's not even a word, who seduced honest German working people. Although anti-Semitism was the heart of Mein Kampf, there was more. Hitler wrote that the German people would have to reestablish their supremacy in Western Europe to acquire the much needed Lebensraum they needed. It's a German word. It simply means living space. Now this would be in the East. So Hitler's already laying out a plan that he wants to expand Germany into Eastern countries, places like Poland and Czechoslovakia, and even further east to some degree. So the interesting thing is, people sometimes are it seems like people later on are surprised that Hitler does a lot of the things he does, but he kind of spells out what he wants to do here in Mein Kampf. So Hitler wasn't entirely clear, but he did seem, like I said, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, the Slavic people were someone he specifically did not like. He thought they were racially inferior, and that Germany deserved to have those lands. Now, how big a seller was this book? Well, at first, the book did not sell well. By 1930, this is 1923 we're talking about. By 1930, only 23,000 copies had been sold. But in the next 3 years, 1.5 million copies were sold, because this is when the Nazis really become much more powerful. By the end of Hitler's lifetime, about 8 to 9 million copies of Mein Kampf were sold. Maybe by the time he gets to 1930 and after, foreigners start buying it because they're more interested in who is this guy, because he all of a sudden is not just some random local guy in Germany, but he's become someone who's known across the world. Okay, so without question, Hitler had good but evil political instincts, meaning he did make a lot of good, shrewd political decisions, but they weren't always kind. But he understood what needed to be done. He wasn't naive to politics. So Hitler, as he gets out of prison, says, "I shall start again." He begins to look into rebuilding. I don't know if I'd say from the ground up, but pretty close to the ground up, the Nazi Party. He definitely is determined not to try to overthrow the government again. He is determined to try to take power legally. So they need to build up their party. They need to grow. They need to become an important political factor in Germany. But in order for this to happen, they needed their influence to reach beyond Bavaria, which is where it had stayed. So back in Munich, Hitler refused to take sides with any Nazi factions. So one of his ways to rebuild it is he wanted to be above all those factions. He would be the leader, holding himself above those things, and of course he would dramatize himself as the leader. So Hitler is very good at the manipulating, the playing the games, and looking above, just the politics that were going on. Even though he was playing politics, he didn't appear to be that way. A good example is later on. This is quite a while down the road, but when the Nazis take power, many Germans didn't like the Nazis, but they love Hitler. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering Hitler is a Nazi and he's the head of the Nazis. But he does a good job distancing himself and making himself seem like maybe he doesn't agree with everything the Nazis are doing and seeming above it. People see him in that way. Hitler's first major speech after his release from prison took place February 27th, 1925. It took place in the Burger Brauhaus, which was the site where the failed takeover of the Munich government took place. So that's kind of interesting. He had not lost his touch. He rallied all groups within the party around his leadership. He denounced Marxism and the Jews. He also made a demand. He demanded that the party membership vote him dictatorial powers to be the leader of the Nazi party. In March 1925, Hitler had received oaths of loyalty from almost all of the Bavarian Nazis. Now he was truly the Führer. So there's a word that's pretty important, Führer. It simply means leader, and that would be the title that Hitler would be known as. Mein Führer means my leader. You would actually have two dots over the parts of the U, but I haven't figured out how to do that on the English keyboard. I'm sure there's a way, but I haven't figured it out. As tokens of his new power and prestige, Hitler acquired two possessions, a new red Mercedes, and second, a new personal headquarters, the Berchtesgaden, which was a mountain house. It was rustic. Windows afforded spectacular views. That does look like a pretty amazing location for a house, although probably pretty hard to get to. Hitler spent still more time wearing lederhosen, which is traditional German dress, leather shorts with the suspender type things, and hiking through the hills. It's almost like he's going to be in The Sound of Music. While at Berchtesgaden, Hitler also acquired the service of a new secretary, and this is important. His name is Joseph Goebbels. He was the son of a middle-class Catholic family from the valley of the Rhine. Goebbels had earned a doctorate from Heidelberg University in the fields of literature and drama. He was sharp-faced, had a fairly dark complexion. He was small. He was just over 5 feet tall and barely weighed more than 100 pounds. When he was a child, he had polio, a disease that left him with a twisted foot. Because of his deformity, he had not been able to perform military service. Now, here's the weird thing that, every time I think about this, because the Nazis want to get rid of people who have deformities and physical ailments, and Joseph Goebbels has those, and he's going to be a very prominent leader in the Nazi party. Now, he certainly didn't have any mental issues. So Goebbels is actually a very gifted writer and lecturer. He's not as good a speaker as Hitler, but he is pretty gifted in that area, a writer, and he really excels at propaganda. And propaganda is just simply trying to portray things in a way to get support. It can be dishonest for sure. You could almost think of it as fake news, but you're trying to get the fake news to get people to believe what you want them to believe. And Goebbels and Hitler together formed this friendship here that allowed their propaganda to become very prevalent and very successful in German society. Hitler and Goebbels, however, were having a tough time gaining ground in northern Germany. It was a largely Protestant region, a long history of against the largely Catholic South. It was the land of cities. It wasn't as rural, so the north was more urban. And they had little use, this area in the north had little use for Hitler, who was considered a peasant gutter snipe from Austria. So they try to figure out how they can make an appeal to the north, because they need to expand their base. They need to have more people supporting them than just a few locals in the southern part of Germany. So in the mid-1920s and onward, German economy gradually stabilized. You began to see things go better. They established a new type of money, which helped stop the inflation. They elected Paul von Hindenburg as president of the Weimar Republic, which made it more accepted because Paul von Hindenburg was extremely popular, and people began to support the government more because Hindenburg was in charge. So this isn't, a good thing for the Nazis. They need people to be dissatisfied, but people were becoming a little bit more satisfied. So Hitler continues to build his oratory skills. Hitler would actually practice speeches before a full-length mirror, practiced hand movements for hours on end. He was a showman, and like I said, was very good at building up the emotion of the people. So eventually, because they need more presence in the north, Hitler sends Goebbels, who's pretty capable, to Berlin, which was the old capital of the Prussian Empire, and a very important city in northern Germany. In October 1926, Goebbels took over leadership of the Berlin branch of the Nazi Party. Um, the Nazi Party in this area was reactionary, and the structure was pretty loose, and had little support among members of the working class, which they were trying to fix. Goebbels' effort came, however, unfortunately, to nothing. Hitler, however, wanted to take Berlin. He never gave up on the dream. So in November 1926, he placed Franz von Pfeffer in charge of the SA in Berlin. His job was to turn the thugs, the street ballers, into a more disciplined group and paramilitary force. The stormtroopers resisted all efforts that tried to take away their independence. Hitler had feared that they might even turn against him. The Fuhrer had to make a personal appeal for the group's loyalty, and he did that. So they became loyal to him again. In the spring of 1927, Hitler ordered the SA units to attack his opponents in Berlin. By May, however, he stood defeated after weeks of provocations and bloody street fights. The Berlin police succeeded in evicting the whole of the Nazi Berlin apparatus. So Franz von Pfeffer was a failure, and he failed to make any changes for the Nazi Party in Berlin. This really leads to the question that we're going to be hitting here as we're getting very close to ending this lecture today. Who were the Nazis' constituents? Now you might be like, who's a constituent? That means who are the people you can count on to vote for you? So let's look at, like American society today. Who can Republicans primarily, I'm not going to say always, but primarily count upon to vote for them? Christians tend to vote Republican more. Minorities tend to vote Democrat more. I'm not saying all, but they tend to vote Democrat. Women actually tend to vote Democrat more as well. Military people tend to vote Republican more. So that's what you're talking about when you're talking about constituents. You can count on certain people in a majority to vote for you. But who do the Nazis have? Farmers aren't really big supporters of the Nazis. The workers aren't real big supporters of the Nazis. And the middle class wasn't really big supporters of Nazis. I mean, they had a fringe amount of people from each of these groups, but they couldn't say one of these groups was their constituents, that they could count on their votes. Well, an event happens. This is before the onset of the Great Depression, which we'll be covering in the next lecture. But one of the agriculturist sections in the Western economies suffered from their own depression. The price for farmers hit new lows in Schleswig-Holstein, an area which was well known for its dairy farming. What happened was the cows got foot and mouth disease, and obviously because they have that, the milk for the cows is something people will not buy. So this caused the price of milk to plummet. It caused a lot of these farmers to go deeply into debt. This is a time period too when farmers tended to be spending a lot of money to keep up with some of the changes. You started getting tractors and mechanical equipment that would help you farm more, but it also put you in debt. And then if things go bad, you're doing really poorly as a farmer. So where could the farmers turn? Could they go to the large commercial banks? However, they charge really high interest rates, so they couldn't really go there. They and their families faced poverty and eviction. So to whom could they turn? They could turn to the Nazi Party. Okay, the Nazis take up the fight for the northern farmers. Hitler saw an opening here, rushing to the region. They made appeals to the, quote, little man, persuading the farmers that their problems lay in the machinations of Germans, Jewish financiers. So they're laying the blame on the Jewish people who they say run the banks, which charge huge interest rates. Their talk of doom and destruction and their offer of simple solutions to a complicated problem and their anti-Semitism proved irresistible to these rural farmers here in Schleswig-Holstein. The Nazis could appeal. So this showed that the Nazis could appeal beyond Bavaria, beyond their home area. Now, this is just a small step, however. It's not like all of a sudden the Nazis were a big party. So as of 1928, the numbers, people who were supporting Nazis, was still very dismal and a very small number. um, so what the Nazis then do they begin trying to promote a propaganda campaign conjuring up the mythical golden age of the past, and trying to talk up, let's return Germany to greatness. Okay, so at a 1929 Nuremberg rally for the Nazi Party, Hitler shares the platform with veteran associations and prominent businessmen. So prominent businessmen would be kind of the middle class to sometimes even a little bit upper class. Veterans, this would once again appeal to the military. This was the 15th anniversary of the outbreak of World War One, and obviously this was very staged. Hitler worked out all the things that would happen. Some 500 newspapers were there covering this particular rally. Hitler built additional support um, by opposing the so-called Young Plan. Germany had been paying its reparations on schedule, but officials in Washington and financiers in New York believed that Germany could be a rich market for American goods only if the burden of reparations were lessened. Under the Young Plan, named for American banker Owen D. Young, the U.S. government offered to scale down reparations. Most Germans, however, believed that they should not have to pay anything. So Hitler aligns himself with those people that say we should stop paying reparations completely, which was the first time Hitler really strikes a chord with the average person and has mainstream appeal, because this is kind of the mainstream opinion. In 1929, the Nazi Party had a series of successes in local and regional elections. All the same, Hitler's party was still pretty much rooted in small towns and villages, and was unable to build momentum on a national scene. However, that will all change when we get to our next video, where we talk about the Great Depression, which is a big reason that Hitler is able to come to power. Okay, so as we're closing here, last thing, I want you to answer one more question. What is your favorite drink? So drink, like maybe it's Coke, maybe it's Dr. Pepper, maybe it's water, who knows what it may be, but just put on there what your favorite drink is. So I'm going to sign out and hope you guys are doing well. We'll talk to you guys later.